Imagine it. The year is 1823. Up until recently, European countries, most notably Spain, have been gathering a bunch of land in Central and South America and claiming it as colonies. But now, these colonies are claiming their own independence. That sort of put the United States in a kind of precarious situation. Yes, the United States was recognized as its nation, but if there's no rule to keep a country from invading another one and calling it a colony in a place that already exists, then there's no rule that would keep any of those powers with a more powerful military from coming back and retaking the United States. That brings us to December 2nd. James Monroe was about to give his State of the Union address to Congress, in which he would address that growing problem and how he would deal with colonialism moving forward. The first point the president makes is about spheres of influence. There's the New World, where we live, and the Old World, that's Europe. The president believes these two entities should remain separate, and any attempt at those from the Old World coming into the New World and trying to um, create a dominance over one of these newly independent states, the United States would take that as a personal threat. These new countries, I quote, are henceforth not to be considered as subjects for future colonization by any European powers, and also we owe it to the amicable relations existing between the United States and those powers to declare that we should consider any attempt on their part to extend their system to any portion of this hemisphere as dangerous to our peace and safety. At the same time, for whatever colonies are currently still in existence and under the power of one of those powers, um, they would not be messed with by us. We're not going to interfere with what's currently going on. We just don't want any new colonies, is what they're saying. But that also implies to we're not going to interfere with any interdepartmental situations going on with those powers that be. The words that James Monroe was speaking was, of course, part of a much larger speech, and he had no idea at the time that those words would be part of his defining legacy moving forward. The immediate reaction to the speech was a non reaction from those it was intended for, the European powers. In fact, just ask this Austrian prince, who was actually so annoyed by it that he thought that those words from James Monroe would actually reinvigorate Europe to colonize even harder. Not everyone scoffed, though. Some were actually in support, like England, uh, quietly, if nothing else. But the reality was, if uh, Spain was to somehow overtake these countries again, what would happen is Britain would lose the ability to trade with these countries, and they had become fans. And it would also sort of go against their own Pax Britannica, which was to have peace between the ruling powers. And naturally, Latin America showed even more support for James Monroe's words, as they were fighting for their lives and livelihoods against Spain. So even though they knew that the U.S. wasn't exactly in a position to enforce those words, they appreciated him. It should be noted that this was not a foreign policy. When James Monroe gave this speech, it wasn't a doctrine, it was just that, a speech. It wouldn't become a doctrine until years later. Some even called the doctrine a form of imperial anti colonialism. But really, it was just a speech from Monroe, the President of the United States, explaining how he felt and his stance towards the things that were happening in the America. The Monroe speech did not become the Monroe Doctrine until 2 decades following his death. And it didn't become a big part of U.S. foreign policy for 100 years. And it's also been broken many times over the years. But as we turned a corner into the 20th century, the United States was finally in a position where they could actually enforce the Monroe Doctrine. And at that point is when it started to become a real serious tenet of American policy, and it's now considered one of our longest standing tenets. Several presidents have invoked the Monroe Doctrine over the years, including Kennedy. Here is a quote from a speech he was going to give the day he was assassinated. "We in this country, in this generation, are, by destiny rather than choice, the watchmen on the walls of world freedom." For more information about the presidency of James Monroe or even Kennedy, please check back on episodes about their tenures.